What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? What happens when the world's most complete defense runs into the world's most potent offense? What happens when two child geniuses with incredibly different combat abilities come into combat against each other? Battles like this make us ask the question, what's the most important thing in a battle? Is it speed? Is it defense? Or is it stamina? Battles like this make us ask the question, what weaknesses does this no weakness character have? And how would this character, whose only loss was ever plot convenience, lose in a battle? See, one of the most common battles that we see in the Naruto community is a battle between the two highest scorers on the Ninja Academy exam of all time, Minato and Itachi. This battle fascinates people because it is truly the circumstance of an immovable object versus an unstoppable force. You have flying Raijin in perfect Sage mode up against an almost complete and arguably one of the strongest Susanos in the entirety of Naruto. You have the Rasengan versus the Sharingan. You have sealing jutsus versus, well, other sealing jutsus. And then obviously there's the fact that Itachi's entire life he was compared to Minato, having the second highest score in the Ninja Academy exam, only below Minato. And while these two would never find themselves on the opposite side of a battlefield because they had extremely similar wants, it doesn't stop us from pondering as a community what truly would have happened if they did find themselves on opposite sides of a battlefield. And in a one-on-one, who comes out victorious? Now, I am not a power scaler. If you want me to sit here and talk about how hard Minato can punch a tree and therefore he's small island level, I'm sorry, this isn't the video. However, there are a few people on the face of this earth who know Naruto better than me, and I believe I can make a pretty informed opinion considering the fact I completely understand both the entirety of Minato and Itachi's movesets, powers, weaknesses, and abilities. And while yes, I do have a tattoo of Minato, I would also have a tattoo of Itachi in a heartbeat if I just had more space. So I'm not biased, or am I? You're gonna have to watch the video to find out. But before we get hopping into our first ever versus battle on this page, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And who knows, guys, if this video does well, maybe we can do versus battles on my other page, The Weeb Commander, where we talk about any anime that's not Naruto. Before we get into all that, guys, today I'm gonna talk to you about a brand new sponsor, Established Titles. You see, Established Titles is a new, fun, and novel way to protect the earth we all inhabit. Specifically, to protect the natural woodlands of Scotland. But what do I mean by that? Well, Established Titles is built on the ancient principle that any landowner in Scotland is referred to as a lord or a lady. By buying a title pack from Established Titles, you receive at least 1 square foot of land within a private estate in Scotland, specifically within Edelston, Scotland. And on top of that land, you also receive a certificate with a mark of authenticity. But here's the thing, you don't have to buy this for yourself. In fact, I bought it for my dog. So while I personally may not be a lord, my dog Neutron is now and forever will be Lord Neutron. On top of becoming a lord, with every single order, Established Titles plants a tree and work with charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to establish reforestation efforts all across the globe. And here's the thing, this is real. It's an actual title. You can add Lord Blank to your credit cards or your plane tickets. So not only will you be funding reforestation efforts all across the world, you will also be protecting Scottish woodlands, as well as becoming a real-life actual lord or lady. And if that's not good enough for you, the first 200 people who buy a plot using the link in my description will buy the plot next to Neutron's plot, meaning that if enough of you want to become lords or ladies, we can build a kingdom for my dog. And if building a kingdom for my 90-pound pitbull isn't good enough for you, Established Title is running a huge Black Friday deal right now. If you use the code NZHammer23 at checkout, you'll get 10% off your order. So go ahead and go to establishedtitles.com/NCHammer23 for 10% off your order today. That's Lord Weeb to you, sir. So, our first versus battle. Scary stuff. Feels as though the comments are going to be a bit vitriol, but that's all right. We'll deal with that when the video comes out. Before we get to talking about who wins and why they win, I want to set the parameters for what we're talking about today. Obviously, both Minato and Itachi have a myriad of different shapes and forms they've taken throughout the duration of Naruto's timeline. They were both alive at some point, they were both reincarnated at some point. And then obviously there's Itachi's illness to take into circumstance, which a lot of people take away from him when they're talking about versus battles, to give us the true strongest form of Itachi. So I'd like to make it entirely clear that today we are not talking about these two battling as reincarnations in Edo Tensei. And we're definitely not talking talking about what if Itachi wasn't sick. As we start to enter the what if territory with Itachi, it's incredibly hard to place where he would be power-wise. We can make a hypothesis that states he would be X amount stronger than he currently is without his chakra sickness, but also the presence of Itachi's chakra sickness is basically just implied by Obito. It's stated significantly more prevalently that his overuse of the MS is actually what accelerated his death. So to sit here and postulate about how much stronger Itachi would have been without this chakra sickness making him weaker while trying to talk about a versus battle simultaneously is just too thick of water to wade through. So to be crystal clear, today we are talking about the strongest forms of both Minato and Itachi while they were alive the first time. So for Minato, that would be the night of his death, and for Itachi, I would hypothesize it's about 2 years into him joining the Akatsuki. At that point, his Susanoo was as formed as it would become. He hadn't abused his MS that much at that point, and his chakra sickness probably wasn't as bad as it was at the end. Because I find it hard to believe that the Itachi we saw in the battle against Sasuke was the strongest iteration of Itachi. But this does mean that Minato will not have KCM and that Itachi will still have his chakra sickness, which is a pretty fair nerf to both of them. Now that we understand the rules of this battle, let's get to talking about the pros of each of the fighters in said battle, starting with Itachi. The reason that we have Itachi in this battle against Minato, arguably the third strongest Hokage of all time, which would make him probably the third strongest Kage of all time, is for a myriad of reasons, but really it's only for one reason, and that would be his MS. You see, amongst MS users, Itachi's MS is arguably one of the most useful. I mean, sure, Amaterasu was a meme that's basically never hurt or destroyed anything meaningful ever, especially in the circumstance of Itachi, considering the fact he didn't have Kagutsuchi like Sasuke, meaning that if Itachi wanted to use Amaterasu, it was kind of like shooting a short-barreled shotgun out of his eye with black flames. Itachi can control generally in the direction Amaterasu goes, but he can't give it shape or form like Sasuke. The true strength of Itachi's MS abilities come from Tsukiyomi. Tsukiyomi, to me, is arguably the second strongest genjutsu in the entirety of Naruto. With the first not being Kodo Matsukame, it's whatever Obito used on Yagura to completely change his personality, because it's basically Kodo Matsukame and it doesn't have a 10-year cooldown. So yes, am I currently saying that Tsukiyomi is stronger than Kodo Matsukame? I am, for a myriad of reasons. If you're an average Uchiha, and that's saying you don't have Hashirama's cells binded to you like Madara or Danzo, the cooldown for you to use Kodo Matsukame is 10 years. And assuming you have it in both eyes like Shisui, that means in an 80-year lifespan, you can use Kodo Matsukame 16 times, which is nothing to scoff at, but if hypothetically you have Tsukiyomi and EMS, you can use it whenever you want. Not to mention with Kodo Matsukame, we have seen that if anybody sees that your chakra networks are disrupted with the use of a Byakugan, or basically anything that allows you to sense somebody else's chakra networks, they can just break you out of it like it's a regular genjutsu. This is not the case for Tsukiyomi. Why is this not the case for Tsukiyomi, you ask? Because Tsukiyomi happens in under a second. There's no walking around doing your day job while under Tsukiyomi. It extends time almost exponentially, giving you 72 hours of torture within the span of a second. Not to mention this torture was quite literally enough to put Kakashi in a coma. It's a borderline almost instant win state that happens almost any singular time you make eye contact with Itachi, assuming you yourself don't have a Sharingan of equal power to Itachi's. Or maybe a Byakugan. It's loosely implied that Byakugan can for a small amount of resistance to ocular dojutsu genjutsu. But that being said, Shisui was able to use an MS genjutsu on Mukai Kohinata in Itachi Shinden's first book, I believe. But regardless, Minato doesn't have a Byakugan, so there's really no reason to even talk about this. So Tsukiyomi is a terrifying thing to come up against. But Tsukiyomi isn't even the scariest thing that comes from Itachi's Sharingan. That, of course, would be Itachi's Susanoo, said to be the second strongest Susanoo in the entirety of Naruto by the majority of people whose brains are wired correctly. Itachi's Susanoo achieving this level of power is really a testament to Itachi, considering the fact that his Susanoo isn't even complete. You see, Itachi's able to manifest his Susanoo from the waist up, which means unlike Madara, Sasuke, and Kakashi, it doesn't have wings or legs, which means the mobility of the Susanoo is relatively limited to wherever Itachi can walk, which does make his Susanoo kind of a sitting duck. But that's really not that much of an issue, because the reason that Itachi's Susanoo was arguably the second strongest Susanoo in the entirety of Naruto are the things that come along with it. You see, Itachi's Susanoo is not only a Susanoo and therefore almost impregnable defensively, it also has a little thing called the Yatamir. Now this Yatamir, which is actually named after one of the 3 imperial regalia of Japan, which are 3 items that are passed down from Japanese emperor to emperor to emperor, is a manifested chakra shield that has all 5 elemental nature releases built into it. And the way that it works is that if any jutsu is launched at Itachi Susanoo and it hits the Yatamir will change to the nature release that is currently hitting the shield. Meaning that if you shoot a fireball at this Yatamir, the Yatamir will turn its chakra nature to fire and reject the fireball. This is terrifying in premise when you consider the fact that behind this Yata mirror is still one of the most impregnable defensive things in the entirety of the Naruto universe. And on top of that, the Yata mirror is said to be able to deflect all spiritual and physical attacks, according to the third data book. And by spiritual, it can be largely assumed that we're talking about genjutsu, because when we talk about how chakra is comprised, it's a combination of spiritual energy and physical energy, with spiritual energy being ninshu, which Hagoromo passed around the earth. However, when humans combined it with their physical energy, they were able to create chakra and mold that chakra into ninjutsu. And thus, spiritual attacks could be interpreted in a couple of different ways. One, we could say that the Yata mirror is able to deflect things like ninshu, which would be weird when we consider the fact that ninshu was just Hagoromo's way of having all humans tap into the greater plane of existence. Or we could say that spiritual attacks refers to yin release, which is best described as things like genjutsu, as genjutsu attacks your spirit. But once again, Minato doesn't use genjutsu, so really not something we need to worry about. Basically, all you need to take from us talking about the Yata mirror is that all ninjutsu and possibly genjutsu are nullified by it. And even if they weren't, it would still probably be rejected by the fact that Itachi is still wrapped in an almost complete Susanoo. The other thing that Itachi Susanoo comes with is the Sword of Totsuka, a mythical blade that was actually originally gifted to Susanoo by Amaterasu in order to slay the great snake Orochi in Shinto lore. This Sword of Totsuka, held in Itachi's right hand, has the ability to seal anybody impaled by it in the realm of drunken dreams, which is a realm held within a sake jar that also manifests with the Susanoo. Now, this realm of drunken dreams is a genjutsu reality of sorts, and anybody sealed within this realm of drunken dreams goes through a constant feeling of dizziness. It is, for all intents and purposes, an instant win state. If Itachi stabs you with the Sword of Totsuka, the battle's over and you get to be dizzy for the rest of eternity. Well, actually, we don't know if it's eternity because we don't know if when Itachi dies, the realm of drunken dreams lets all the souls out. For the very least, as long as Itachi is still alive. With the combination of these two weapons, Black Zetsu stated that Itachi Susanoo was invincible. And honestly, I find that hard to argue with. But even without the Susanoo, Itachi is an incredibly powerful foe. I would say his battle IQ is arguably the highest we've ever seen in the show, being able to perfectly deduce how to get out of any situation, even setting up Koto Matsukame in a crow to place in Naruto in order to use on Sasuke, but using it against himself to break the binds of Edo Tensei. Situations like Itachi understanding that the only way he could get Kabuto to release Edo Tensei would be something like Izanami, and a myriad of other genius level decisions that Itachi's made during combat really point us in the direction of him being 1 out of 1. Not to mention, as a wielder of the Sharingan, he also has access to things like Izanami and Izanagi. Though arguably Izanami isn't something we need to consider in a battle against Minato because it only can be used against people who are trying to change reality. And I'd hardly say that Minato fills those requirements. On top of this, Itachi is one of the faster people we've seen in Naruto. He was able to react in pseudo-dodge Kirin. And mind you, Kirin uses actual lightning. And while the light that we see travel from lightning does obviously travel at the speed of light, the speed that lightning actually travels down to Earth is around 300,000 miles per hour. Being able to react to that and get his Susanoo created to deflect it is nothing to scoff at. I mean, it's not instantaneous movement, but still. On top of this, we've seen times where Itachi's hand signs were so fast that even Kakashi and Sasuke couldn't keep up with them. And that's Kakashi the copy ninja. And then obviously Itachi is no slouch intellectually, having scored the second highest ever score on the written part of the Ninja Academy exam. But if we're talking intellect, obviously we have to give that to Minato, considering he's the only person who's scored higher. But enough about Itachi's pros, let's talk about some of his cons. While Itachi Susanoo is a formidable weapon, it is incomplete, meaning that it confers next to no defense from the ground. A Susanoo is formed from the ground up, and the fact that Itachi can walk within his Susanoo and his Susanoo moves with him implies that Itachi is in fact touching the ground. Because if there was chakra between Itachi's feet and the ground, well, he wouldn't really be walking now, would he? And while usually this isn't a massive issue considering the strength of his Susanoo, the fact that there is a pregnable defect in Itachi Susanoo could play into effect later. On top of that, since we're not talking about true power Itachi, there's the obvious fact that he does have chakra sickness. And like I said earlier, we've never really been told about what this chakra sickness is or how much it nerfs him, but we do know that stamina is very much an issue for Itachi. And in fact, we've seen this be an issue for Itachi multiple times. I mean, obviously at the end of his battle against Sasuke, Itachi just dies. But this isn't the only time that we've seen stamina be an issue for Itachi. In Itachi and Juzo's battle against Yagura in order to secure Isobu, the Three Tails, Itachi is shown not only basically tying against Yagura, but also having to retreat on account of being out of chakra. And while obviously Yagura is nothing to scoff against in terms of a battle opponent, a tie against Yagura and having to retreat because he was out of chakra isn't a great look for somebody who has to fight a Hokage significantly stronger than Yagura. Now, obviously, that was non-canon, so we won't put too much stake into it, but it's still something to consider. But it's more to service the fact that the real biggest weakness for Itachi is stamina. So now that we have Itachi sufficiently covered, we should talk about the other battler in this versus battle, Minato. And just like with Itachi, we'll start by talking about his pros. The obvious pro with Minato is his speed, being known as the fastest ninja alive even when Itachi and the 4th and 3rd Raikages were alive. Now, is this speed due in fact to the flying Raijin, or is it just Minato's god-given speed? It's probably a combo of both. Minato's speed is technically infinite. Minato, when he uses flying Raijin, enters a space between dimensions. And within this space between dimensions, there is no mass, no oxygen, no anything. And thus, when Minato enters this dimensional space, he travels to whatever marking he wants instantaneously, not at the speed of light or the speed of sound, or just really fast instantly, in 0 seconds flat. Which means with a sufficient amount of markings placed around a battlefield, Minato can travel anywhere he wants to instantly. And when you consider the fact that all Minato has to do in order to place a marking is touch something and it requires next to no chakra, this is a very broken ability. Essentially, Minato's ability to dodge anything comes down to his reaction time. Whatever you try to hit Minato with, he can just jump to a different marking. That is, so long as he can react to it. And we've seen that Minato's reaction time is incredibly fast, being able to perfectly understand the exact moment when he had to teleport to his kunai to land a Rasengan to the back of Obito, while that part of Obito wasn't Kamui away. Situations like this also speak to Minato's battle IQ. Well, I'm more likely than not probably going to give Itachi the leg up when it comes to battle IQ. The fact that in a battle against Obito, Minato was able to perfectly deduce how his abilities work and how to counter them speaks to his battle IQ. Not to mention things like Minato understanding that in the 4th Great Shinobi World War that his back should be used to block the true secret orbs that were going to be launched by Madara, and the situational awareness to understand that he needed to seal half of Kurama inside of himself using Death Reaper seal and use the 8 trigram seal to seal the other half in Naruto because a full Kurama would kill Naruto, once again speaks to battle IQ. But since we're talking about his battle against Obito, we should talk about how that battle ended. Obviously, Minato did find himself victorious against Obito, and to say that this version of Obito was even anything close to the later iterations we saw of Obito is a stretch. But the most important thing I want to talk about is the fact that Minato was able to seal half of Kurama's chakra inside of himself using Reaper Death Seal, because this actually points us towards a very important conclusion about Minato. You see, on the night of Kurama's attack, Minato not only teleported away an entire tailed beast bomb away from Konoha, which would have been incredibly chakra depletive, he also beat Obito in a fight. On top of that, he had to protect Kushina and Naruto multiple times using Flying Raijin a bunch of times, and so to assume that he had all of his chakra while battling Kurama is insane, which means that when Minato decided to use Reaper Death Seal, he probably didn't even have his max amount of chakra. He probably wasn't even close. And yet Minato was still able to pull half of Kurama's chakra out of his body. I don't know if you guys know the way that Reaper Death Seal works, but it's essentially a chakra tug-of-war. You can only pull out so much soul as you have chakra of the person whose soul you're pulling out, which would imply, since Minato was able to pull out half of Kurama's soul and seal it inside of himself, that at that point, Minato had half as much chakra as Kurama. Mind you, Naruto, for almost the entirety of the show until the 4th Great Shinobi World War, only had half of Kurama. And with just half of Kurama, Naruto was able to give version 1 tailed beast cloaks to the entirety of the Shinobi allied forces. And when Naruto did that, Hashirama stated that this is as much chakra as I had when I was alive, which would mean max output Kurama, what Naruto was doing in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, is equal to half of Kurama, which is equal to the chakra of Hashirama, a man stated to have almost limitless chakra, and that is equal to Minato's chakra. And honestly, it makes sense when you think about it, when you consider the fact that very few people are able to use Flying Raijin because of how chakra depletive it is. And yet every time we've ever seen Minato, he spams it like it's nothing. On top of all of that, Minato is a perfect sage. And while he states he doesn't use his sage mode because he's no good at collecting Senjutsu chakra, that doesn't stop the fact that he is a perfect sage. Mind you, Jiraiya, who was an imperfect sage, was able to defeat 4 of the 6 paths of pain by himself with no prior knowledge of their abilities. And he didn't know Flying Raijin. This means that Minato trained at Mount Muobuka, which means he probably has contracts with toads. And even if he is no good at Sage mode, he can just make clones who gather in the Senjutsu chakra for him, just like his son does, giving Minato, much like Naruto, almost an infinite supply of chakra, which once again makes sense when you consider some of the feats that Minato has pulled off, like closing the door on the 3rd Great Shinobi World War by killing 1,000 Iwa Shinobi by himself. Unfortunately for Minato, he's fighting somebody with a similar body count to his own. But enough about the pros of of Minato, let's talk about the cons. Minato, while an incredibly talented ninjutsu genius, is never essentially stated to have any kind of genjutsu resistance whatsoever. So something along the lines of being cast into Tsukiyomi would be an instant win state for Itachi. On top of this, the ability to break a Susanoo is honestly kind of an iffy topic in Naruto. I mean, we saw Tsunade destroy Madara's ribcage, and we saw Ishiki pluck Sasuke out of his completed Susanoo. We've also seen Madara block a giant Rasengan with just his Susanoo ribcage, which leads us to the question, is Tsunade's kick actually stronger than a giant Rasengan? The problem here becomes for Minato that he may not have a jutsu technically strong enough to break Itachi's Susanoo. Considering the fact that if Naruto's giant Rasengan couldn't break Madara's ribcage, who's to say that Minato's regular Rasengan could break it almost fully formed Susanoo? But now that we're talking about the possibility of these two breaking each other, let's get into the battle itself. Now that we understand the pros and the cons of each character, figuring out who the winner should be relatively easy. The real question becomes whose weapons counter whose weapons. I'd like to come out and say that genjutsu will not be a problem in this battle. There's quite literally no possibility that Itachi would have the ability to put Minato under genjutsu, unless of course Itachi was willing to use Izanami. Why? Outside of the fact that there's basically no reason that Minato would ever need to look in Itachi's eyes because he likes to attack from blind points, Minato doesn't need to fight this fight with his eyes open. What do I mean by that? Well, we know with Sage Mode, specifically those who are perfect Sage, don't need to see to sense. Things like Froggy Kumite are predicated on the fact that Sage Mode users can understand where somebody is gonna be without necessarily seeing them in that place. On top of this, Madara was able to fight against Sasuke and dodge all of his attacks after absorbing Hashirama's Senjutsu. And this wasn't just because Madara knew exactly where Sasuke was going to be swinging, it was because of the nature chakra he was absorbing through Hashirama's cells. In essence, Sage Mode kind of works like future sight hockey. By being tapped into the nature energy around you, you can sense where somebody is and where they're going to be. In essence, Sage Mode in this way kind of operates a bit like a Sharingan, giving you an extrasensory perception into the movements of others. So once again, concerning the fact that Minato wouldn't need to make eye contact with Itachi and also wouldn't even need his eyes open, Tsukiyomi is off the table. And so is Izanami. Because remember, Izanami was made to counter Izanagi. And Izanagi is when people try to reject reality and change it to their own. This only worked on Kabuto because he was trying to change his reality and reject him being Kabuto and try to become an amalgamation of a bunch of different people whose abilities he stole. Minato doesn't fit the description of somebody trying to reject reality, and thus Izanami is out. When it comes down to these two, the difference between IQ and battle IQ between the two of them is all but negligible. They are both super geniuses who can figure out anything they need to in the circumstances of a battle. While Itachi might have a smidgen of a higher battle IQ, it's not so noticeable that it's even really worth mentioning. What it really boils down to for Itachi is his Susanoo and Amaterasu. Amaterasu is kind of a sticky spot for Itachi. While Amaterasu does basically just appear on whatever Itachi or Sasuke are looking at, there's still an inherent pseudo travel time. It's not instantaneous, and therefore it's dodgeable or blockable. We've seen Sasuke, A, and the Eight Tails all either react to, block, and or dodge Amaterasu before. Considering the fact that Minato is faster than all three of those people by a long shot and can just teleport to anywhere where the black flames aren't, means that Itachi using Amaterasu on Minato would have to be very situational. Not to mention Amaterasu's effective range is 0 to 5 meters. And while obviously, yes, we have seen Itachi use it further when he was Edo Tensei, while he was alive, it was between 0 and 5 meters. So really, what it boils down to is Itachi's Susanoo. There is literally nothing in Minato's entire arsenal that would be able to destroy Itachi's Susanoo. You could make the argument because the Rasengan inherently doesn't have a chakra nature that the Yatamira wouldn't be able to react to said Rasengan, but the fact that Madara's ribcage was able to block a big ball Rasengan from Naruto implies that even if it did get through the Yatamira, it's probably not getting through the rest of the Susanoo. So what does that mean? Minato doesn't need to destroy Itachi's Susanoo. We've already stated, but when it comes to a battle of stamina between these two, the difference is insurmountable. Peak power Itachi would probably be able to sustain his Susanoo for a matter of minutes. Throw in a couple of tries of trying to use Amaterasu or Tsukiyomi while within his Susanoo, because the user of Susanoo can use jutsus while in the Susanoo, and that timeline gets even shorter. The thing is, there's no reason for Minato to fight Itachi while he has the Susanoo. It's like a battle between DMS Kakashi and 8 Gates Guy. Kakashi could just head to the Kamui realm for about 5 minutes and come back later. And I think Minato would most likely try to break the Susanoo, and then upon having his Rasengan reflected by the Yatamira, understand that that was the strongest move in his arsenal. And while obviously he has things like the Reaper Death Seal, and we don't don't know if the Reaper's Death Seal actually goes through Susanoo. I'm assuming it probably does. The Yatamir being able to deflect spiritual attacks may actually be able to deflect the Reaper Death Seal. Also, I don't consider the Reaper Death Seal a win state because they both die. But honestly, Minato running away until Itachi can't use his Susanoo anymore is kind of a cop-out answer. So the real answer becomes Minato using a well-placed seal. Multiple people can exist within a Susanoo. And while usually the way that somebody is let into a Susanoo is if they're willingly let into the Susanoo, like Naruto with Sasuke. But we've seen with the power of the Kamui that Obito is able to phase through barriers, in that he can enter the Kamui dimension on one side of a barrier and then exit the Kamui dimension on the other side of the barrier. There's arguably no reason for us to assume that flying Raijin would operate any differently. All that Minato would have to do is place a myriad of different seals around and wait for Itachi to finally step on one of them, as Minato would most likely be keeping his distance in this fight because there would really be no reason for him to be pushing the offensive. Once Itachi landed on one of these seals, Minato would be able to teleport to it, effectively teleporting inside of Itachi's Susanoo. Now the real question is, would Itachi fall for something like this? Because like we stated, Itachi's battle IQ is probably higher than Minato's. And the answer is, well, in usual circumstances, probably not. The burden of offensive measures is on Itachi here. Remember, Minato is a perfect sage, and maybe has as much chakra as half of Kurama. Minato was able to fight so long, he cut down 1,000 seasoned Iwa shinobi. And while obviously Itachi was able to surprise attack his clan, he was being helped by Obito. And once again, that was a surprise. Minato met the Iwa shinobi on the battlefield. When it comes to these two fighting in what we would identify as base form, that being Minato not using Sage Mode and Itachi not using his Susanoo, I would argue that their battle IQ, reaction times, and relative speed would be enough that they would both have to enter their higher forms. The problem is, Minato entering his higher form gives him extra time, while Itachi entering his higher form significantly reduces his clock. Meaning that if this is a true death battle, Itachi would have to close the distance between him and Minato, considering the fact that his Susanoo only has close range weapons. And yes, while Itachi can still use jutsu while in his Susanoo, let's not forget how chakra depleted his Susanoo is to it. And the fact that Sasuke said that using the Susanoo feels like lighting every single cell in your body on fire, and he had the EMS. Not to mention, Minato was able to teleport an entire tailed beast bomb away from Konoha using the flying Raijin. Essentially using flying Raijin a bit like Kamui, opening a rift in space to a different dimension, which means that not only would Minato be able to teleport away any of Itachi's attacks, he could possibly teleport away Itachi. And all of this is without acknowledging the fact that if Minato simply gets a hand on Itachi and is able to place a seal on him, the fight's over. The reason that flying Raijin is considered a death jutsu is because if you place a seal on somebody at any point, you can simply jump to them. And since these flying Raijin seals don't wash off with soap and water, in fact, the only way you can get rid of it is by being a Jinchuriki, is what we've seen at least. This means that if Minato is able to get a mark on Itachi before he pulls out his Susanoo, or even after his Susanoo has faded, at any given moment, Minato can pop up in Itachi's life and restart the battle. If you're sitting here and you're asking me, could Minato defeat Itachi's Susanoo? The answer is no. There is only a handful of people in Naruto that would be able to pull that off. It's probably Sasuke, Naruto, Hagoromo, DMS, Kakashi, and Madara, and that might be it. And then obviously the rest of the Otsutsukis. But if I think it really came down to it and these two were battling against each other, Minato wouldn't have to defeat the Susanoo. Itachi has no curse mark to tap into. He only has as much chakra as he brings with him into a battle. Minato, being a perfect sage with an almost endless amount of chakra to begin with, is just gonna outrun Itachi. And I know what you're saying. You're saying,
Nick, you haven't even mentioned the Sword of Totsuka.
well, we've only ever seen the Sword of Totsuka been used twice. Effectively, that is. The first of which was against Orochimaru. When Orochimaru manifested out of Sasuke's curse mark as a huge 8-headed serpent, Itachi stabbed Orochimaru in the body. One, Orochimaru did not know that this was the Sword of Totsuka. In fact, he was yelling about the Sword of Totsuka as he was getting sealed. Two, he was also an incredibly huge and for some reason not moving target. The same could be said about the second time that the Sword of Totsuka is used. After the reanimated Nagato uses Shibuka Tensei to try and pull Itachi, Naruto, and Killer Bee into a big old meteor, said meteor is destroyed by Killer Bee, Itachi, and Naruto. And from the dust, Itachi uses his Susanoo to stab the reanimated Nagato with the Sword of Totsuka. Nagato, who once again was not moving. While obviously we've seen Itachi use the Sword of Totsuka to cut off some of Orochimaru's snake heads, it's not a fast-moving weapon. Nothing about Itachi's Susanoo was fast, especially when we're talking about somebody who moves instantaneously. So if you give Itachi infinite chakra, then absolutely, he's gonna curb stomp Minato. But Itachi's a bit like an old MacBook. Sure, it can still run all the programs you need it to, but it's gotta be plugged in. What do I know? This is the first versus battle I've ever done. What do you guys think? Who do you think would take this win and why? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, Like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. This was actually kind of fun. Oh no, I shouldn't have enjoyed this.